A strange moment occurs in life. The things that used to excite you no longer do. The music plays but no longer touches you. Faces smile but something is missing. And a question arises, heavy, silent. What's wrong with me? But what if that question is the wrong one? What if this emptiness isn't a loss, but a transition? If this is your first time here, subscribe, because you probably won't see this channel again without subscribing. If the video resonates with you, like, share, comment, to help others discover this path. Welcome to this space of clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't an inner storm. It's not even an overcast sky. It's more like an absence of weather. Nothing grows, nothing resists. You get up, you move forward, you accomplish what needs to be done, but something inside you remains detached, as if life were unfolding through a slightly opaque pane of glass. Everything works and yet nothing resonates. What's confusing isn't the suffering. Pain at least has a texture, a direction. It clearly says, something is wrong. Here there is no such legible message. Only an empty space where once there was anticipation, excitement, and emotional response. You look at this emptiness and you search for a name, but no word truly fits. You wonder if you've changed, or if the world has lost something. Maybe both, maybe neither. Because deep down, what's truly unsettling is this strange feeling of being present without being involved, aware without being touched. As if life continues to speak, but in a language you understand without feeling it. And then a question arises, almost innocently. When did this expectation appear? When did you learn that every moment should produce a precise, identifiable, measurable sensation? Where does this idea come from that the absence of vibration would be a sign of a problem, rather than simply one state among others? Because as soon as this thought arises, something else awakens with it. The need to understand, to correct, to repair, and that is precisely where the mind begins to become agitated. The repair reflex. As soon as this emptiness is observed, something automatically activates. The mind springs into action. It doesn't observe, it evaluates. It is not content with what is there, it seeks what is missing. Like a mechanic confronted with an unusual noise, it lifts the hood of the inner experience and begins to draw up a list of possible causes. It wants a diagnosis, a clear origin, and applicable solution. Then the labels appear. Depression, fatigue, loss of meaning. These words offer immediate relief, not because they truly explain, but because they transform the unknown into something manageable. Naming something is already regaining control. Even bad news is more reassuring than the absence of landmarks. At least there is something to do. But let's look at this mechanism more closely. The mind seems incapable of remaining still in the face of an open space. It needs a problem as a point of reference. Without tension to resolve, it feels useless, almost threatened. It operates by contrast, before and after, better and worse, success and failure. A neutral state offers it no foothold. So, it sometimes invents a breakdown where there may only be a momentary cessation of the usual noise. It confuses silence with a malfunction. Yet, in other areas, a pause is not a failure. A breath between two sentences. A beat between two pulsations. A suspension that allows movement to exist. The question therefore is not only what is wrong, but also who, within me, demands that there necessarily be something wrong? And this question, once asked, already begins to shift our perspective toward what is usually called pleasure. The trap of pleasure. If we look more closely at what we call joy, something strange appears. It is not as positive or as autonomous as we imagine. In most cases, it arises precisely where something ceases to hurt. The tension is released, the discomfort dissipates, and this release is immediately interpreted as a desirable state. But what is celebrated is not so much the presence of fulfillment as the momentary absence of a lack. Hunger makes a meal delicious. Without it, eating becomes mechanical. Loneliness makes attention precious. Without it, the presence of another loses its emotional impact. Desire gives intensity to satisfaction. Without prior desire, there are neither peaks nor valleys. What we call pleasure therefore depends entirely on what precedes it. It does not exist in isolation. It is always relative, always conditioned. And that's where the mechanism becomes visible. The stronger the contrast, the more intense the experience. The mind then becomes attached to reproducing these variations, to provoking the lack in order to savor its disappearance. A subtle strategy is put in place: create discomfort to then taste relief. This cycle becomes familiar, almost reassuring. It gives the impression of being alive, engaged in motion. But what happens when this mechanism is understood, not intellectually but internally? When the spring is perceived, the game loses its magic. The relief no longer has the same flavor because its cause has become obvious. Pleasure doesn't necessarily disappear, but its hypnotic power crumbles. And then another question begins to form, even more troubling. If pleasure was only a pause in the tension, what remains when the tension itself begins to fade? What makes this experience so uncomfortable is not what one feels, but what one can no longer ignore. Something has cracked, then collapsed without a spectacular sound. Not a crisis, not a visible drama. Rather, the silent fall of a backdrop whose existence we were unaware of. And since then, the world seems the same, but it no longer plays the same role. We haven't lost the capacity to feel. That idea is too simple, almost reassuring. What has weakened is something else. The capacity to be carried away without seeing what was carrying us away. The distractions worked because they weren't questioned. The pleasures did their job as long as their mechanics remained hidden. But the moment the mechanism is glimpsed, even briefly, the enchantment is broken. It's like watching a magic trick after you've understood how it works. The gestures are the same, the timing is perfect, but something within us no longer reacts. Not out of superiority, nor out of coldness, but because the necessary naivete has disappeared. And this disappearance leaves a strange, almost brutal space, where the old refuges no longer provide the expected effect. Then the mind rebels. It wants to regain its former innocence, the ability to let itself be carried away without reservation. But can we really go back? Can we decide to unlearn what has been learned? This attempt at regression creates additional tension, a new frustration, as if we were trying to convince ourselves of an illusion that has already been unmasked. And in this friction between what no longer works and what has not yet taken shape, a feeling of emptiness settles in, an emptiness that strangely resembles a light too bright to be immediately understood. The analogy of light. Imagine a familiar, intimate space, always illuminated by a flickering light. The flame casts moving shapes on the walls, changing silhouettes that attract attention, tell stories, and give the impression of a rich and vibrant world. You have learned to read these shadows, to find meaning in them, to become attached to them. They punctuated your gaze, nourished your imagination, and gave depth to the experience. Then, without warning, a door opens slightly. It's neither an explosion nor a dramatic revelation. Just an opening. Daylight slowly seeps in, invades the space, and dissolves the contrast. The shadows immediately disappear. The walls appear bare, almost dull. Where there was mystery, there are now only clear, uniform surfaces, difficult to interpret. The first reaction is often disappointment. Everything seems to have lost its charm. What captivated attention now appears banal, without depth. The mind regrets the interplay of forms, the apparent richness of the old lighting. It too quickly concludes that something has been lost, as if an essential element had been removed. But look closer. Daylight eliminates nothing real. It doesn't destroy the room. It simply reveals what was already there without artifice. What seemed bland is not impoverished, only less spectacular. There are no more shadows to distract the eye, no more movement to occupy it. The question therefore arises differently. Is it an impoverishment, or a change of register? What if this unease stems from the fact that your eyes, accustomed to violent contrasts, have not yet learned to see clearly in this new light? For this new perspective, still clumsy, naturally opens onto another sensation, that of an inner silence that is easily mistaken for a disappearance. The false inner death. When the turmoil subsides, something within you tenses up. The mind, deprived of its usual landmarks, immediately interprets this calm as a threat. There is no longer any impetus to pursue, no excitement to anticipate, no tension to resolve. It therefore delivers a quick, almost dramatic verdict. Nothing is happening. And this nothingness, It associates with the end, with uselessness, with a form of inner death. Yet, observe this moment without turning away from it. It is not dark. It is not painful. It is simply bare. The layers of noise have receded, revealing a space that you may never have truly inhabited before. This space has no strong emotional color, no peaks, no troughs. It does not seek to seduce. It asks for nothing. And that is precisely why it is unsettling. The mind has been trained to confuse intensity with life. Where there is no marked movement, it imagines absence. Where there is no stimulation, it projects nothingness. But silence is not the opposite of sound. It is its condition. Without pauses, no music would exist. Without stillness, no gesture would be perceptible. What you are feeling can then be reinterpreted. Not as a lack, but as a cessation of constant demands. A relaxation so profound that it becomes strange. Like a body that, after being tense for too long, no longer knows how to interpret relaxation. This calm does not signal an end. It is rather a suspension, an interval where nothing is required. And it is often at this precise moment, when the mind no longer has anything to comment on, that a new anxiety appears. What to do now without agitation to guide the movement? An anxiety that prepares the ground for another, even more disturbing understanding. The withdrawal from experience. For years, perhaps without realizing it, your inner system has been trained to function under constant stimulation. Every emotion has become a piece of data. Every sensation, proof that something was happening. Existence was evaluated by the intensity of what it produced. The more intense it was, the more real it seemed. The more striking it was, the more alive it felt. This conditioning is not limited to obvious pleasures. It also includes dramas, tensions, anxieties. Anything was better than neutrality. Anything was better than that flat landscape where nothing seemed to capture attention. Agitation therefore became the norm. An agitation sometimes disguised as passion, curiosity, a search for meaning. But deep down, it was an addiction to inner movement. When this flow stops, the body and mind react as if to withdrawal. There is a diffuse discomfort, difficult to pinpoint. Not violent enough to be dramatic, not clear enough to be understood. Just the feeling that something is no longer working as before. And immediately the interpretation arises: I am regressing, I am losing myself, I am not well. Yet, look at the structure of this discomfort. It is not caused by an excess of emptiness, but by the absence of a stimulus to which you were accustomed. Like a sudden silence after constant noise. It is not the silence that hurts, but the adaptation it demands. The nervous system is still looking for its dose of intensity, its point of reference. This moment is often misunderstood because it doesn't fit into any valued narrative. There is nothing to celebrate, nothing to conquer. And it is precisely this absence of a heroic narrative that makes the experience uncomfortable, while also opening the door to a question that few dare to ask. What remains of me when I am no longer carried along by the experience itself? The disturbing paradox. There is an almost reflexive movement within you, the desire to recapture the old joy. Not necessarily the situations or the people, but that recognizable vibration that gave the impression that life was responding. It surged forth powerfully, sometimes for no apparent reason, and you called that being alive. So the mind turns to the past as if searching for proof. It was possible then, so it should still be possible now. But this joy was not self-sustaining. It rested on a specific, often invisible mechanism. It arose from contrast. Moments of intensity existed because they were surrounded by periods of emptiness. Excitement only made sense in contrast to boredom. The peaks were only peaks because there was a valley below. This system produced relief, movement, an inner drama that captivated attention. What appears now escapes this logic. There is no clear ascent, no marked descent. Nothing that can be easily classified as good or bad. This state is continuous, subtle, almost silent. Too silent for a mind accustomed to measuring existence in terms of intensity. It goes unnoticed, like a constant light that is forgotten because it doesn't flicker. So the mind gets bored. It rejects it. It concludes too quickly that there is nothing interesting here. But this judgment rests on an assumption rarely questioned, that what matters must be exciting, remarkable, charged with emotion. What if this assumption were false? What if this new state seems bland not because something is missing, but because it no longer needs to attract attention? This idea is destabilizing because it deprives the mind of its usual role as arbiter of value. And faced with this withdrawal, an impulse arises almost immediately, to provoke movement, to recreate contrast, to bring back the noise, an impulse that prepares the transition to another, even more subtle gesture. The invitation to do nothing. At this precise point, any attempt at action becomes almost superfluous. The usual impulse, to seek, correct, improve, begins to weaken. Not because it has been defeated, but because it no longer finds anything to cling to. The void is still there, but it no longer presents itself as an adversary. It waits, without pressure, without explicit demands. Resist the urge to fill it. This reflex is ancient, deeply ingrained. It arises every time a space appears. A thought, an activity, a memory from the past, anything to re-establish a familiar continuity. But observe this movement without giving in to it. Let it form, then dissolve. Like a wave that never reaches the shore. The same is true for understanding. Trying to explain this state is still an attempt to control it. Concepts are reassuring, but they divert attention to the abstract. Here it's not about analysis, but about presence. Stay with the sensation as it is, without comparing it to what has been or what could be. The past immediately introduces a feeling of lack. The future reintroduces expectation. Consider this moment as you would contemplate the sky. The clouds ask for nothing. They don't try to be different. They pass, transform, disappear without a word. Observation doesn't need a purpose to be complete. It is sufficient unto itself. And then, something subtle begins to happen. Not a spectacular revelation, but an almost imperceptible liberation. The demand fades away. The moment no longer needs to prove its worth. It no longer has to conform to a preconceived image. And in this surrender of expectations, a silent question arises. If nothing is demanded of the present moment, what exactly remains of the experience of being here? This moment you are going through is not the result of chance. It does not stem from a bad choice, a lack of effort, or an inner weakness. It simply marks the end of a certain way of functioning. A way of being human based on the constant search for stimulation, answers, and emotional validation. This model is coming to an end, not in chaos, but in a form of disconcerting simplicity. Nothing extraordinary is happening here. No inner fireworks. No theatrical revelation. And that's precisely why the mind hesitates to acknowledge this transition. It has been conditioned to expect the spectacular to validate reality. But what is unfolding now doesn't seek to impress. It's calm, stable, strangely ordinary. And yet, something is profoundly different. What was once filtered by expectations, judgments, and comparisons, now presents itself without intermediary. There are no longer as many comments, no longer as many narratives superimposed on the experience. Life is no longer evaluated in terms of emotional gains. It is simply lived even before it is interpreted. This realization doesn't feel like a victory. It adds nothing. It takes away. It removes the superfluous layers, the silent demands, the conditions imposed on the present moment. What remains is not a particular emotion, but a presence that doesn't need to vibrate to exist. So perhaps when nothing makes you feel the same way anymore, it's not proof of a definitive emptiness. Perhaps it's the moment when we finally stop chasing the waves, to recognize the ocean that has always been there. If this moment resonated with you, I invite you to stay close. Subscribe, like, and share if you feel the need, not to support a channel, but to continue this path that we are exploring together. Each video is a space where we can breathe a little more freely. Stay with me until the end. You might find a fragment of peace there, or a small light that your spirit has been waiting for a long time.